What would drive one of Hollywood's brightest stars to endure threats from the mob, survive a life-altering crash, and fight his way through deeply ingrained prejudice, only to stand on stage with a single eye, still singing and dancing for adoring fans? The saga of Sammy Davis Jr. is a testament to the incredible heights a performer can reach and the unthinkable lows he can suffer in private. He shattered racial barriers, dazzled audiences on the biggest stages, and left behind a legacy few can match. Yet behind the glitz and glamour of his public life, a far darker reality was unfolding. From faked marriages to appease powerful studio heads to the painful cost of his unrelenting drive for success, Sammy Davis Jr.'s journey reveals how a man can simultaneously be celebrated as a trailblazing genius and trapped in turmoil that defies imagination. By the end of his tumultuous life, the same star who once ruled Las Vegas faced loneliness, crippling debt, and a series of heartbreaks that would shock even his most ardent fans. Today, we uncover his story, one shaped by dazzling triumphs and crushing defeats, personal demons, and societal barriers. Get ready to hear the twists, the heartbreak, and the resilience of a performer who refused to stop entertaining until his very last breath. Sammy Davis Jr. was quite literally born into the world of song and dance. His father, Sammy Davis Sr., earned his living on vaudeville stages, while his mother, Elvira "Baby" Sanchez, was a talented chorus line dancer who lit up venues across Harlem. From the moment he took his first breath, young Sammy seemed destined for show business. Even as a toddler, he stole the show with his uncanny ability to mimic his elders. Crowds were enchanted by his expressive face, rhythmic steps, and astonishing knack for captivating any audience. But life on the road was turbulent. When Sammy was only 3, his parents divorced, and he found himself under the care of his father, who refused to let financial hardship or heartbreak slow down his son's blossoming career. Together with Sammy's uncle Will Maston, the trio toured relentlessly, chasing gigs from one city to the next. To shield Sammy from the realities of racism prevalent at the time, both his father and Maston told him that the ugly incidents they occasionally encountered were mere jealousy. This blissful illusion couldn't last forever. Eventually, reality would come crashing down. Still, during his early childhood, Sammy felt invincible on stage, forging an unshakable confidence that would propel him to legendary status. Yet, no matter how brightly childhood optimism shines, life finds ways to dim even the most promising futures. Sammy would soon face the brutal truth of prejudice, and the battleground that forced him to confront it head-on was far from glamorous. At 18, Sammy Davis Jr. was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II. It was a jarring shift from showbiz spotlights to military barracks. Unlike his father's protective bubble, the Army offered no such sanctuary. Davis found himself part of one of the first integrated infantry units, but despite this nominal progress, the racism from some white soldiers was vicious. He encountered scorn from men who couldn't fathom saluting beside a black performer. Taunts turned physical, repeated fistfights, cruel pranks, and disturbing humiliations. Some soldiers joked by painting his skin white while he slept. Others tricked him into drinking beer laced with urine. The future star of Las Vegas showrooms and Hollywood films spent his nights bruised and his days in dread of the next assault. But Sammy refused to quit. Each confrontation only strengthened his resolve. When he emerged from military service, he had changed. Gone was the bright-eyed boy who believed injustice was simply jealousy. In his place stood a determined young man, ready to conquer the entertainment world and prove to every naysayer that his place on stage was not just a right, but his destiny. Having glimpsed the underbelly of prejudice, Sammy barreled forward. He would take that emboldened spirit right to the heart of show business, where his talent would outshine nearly everyone around him. Rejoining his father and Will Maston, Sammy Davis Jr. hit the entertainment circuit with gusto. The Will Maston Trio had always been a tight-knit act, but now it carried an extra spark. Sammy himself had become the main attraction. Crowds lined up to see the kid with an electrifying stage presence and a voice that could soar from gentle ballads to sassy swing. In 1951, the trio got its big break at Cyro's in Hollywood. Supposed to be just the opening act for the night, Sammy took the stage with such confidence and flair that the audience, packed with celebrities, demanded encore after encore. It was well past the group's scheduled 20-minute slot, yet they performed for nearly an hour. The city's power players were hooked. At first, success still ran into stubborn walls. Major advertisers hesitated to sponsor a show starring a black performer, no matter how talented. Even with an offer for his own television program, those entrenched biases delayed or outright canceled many of his biggest opportunities. Meanwhile, the Will Maston Trio began headlining top venues in Las Vegas, marking a clear shift. Sammy Davis Jr. was on the cusp of stardom.
I gotta be me. I gotta be me.
But fame has a way of clashing headlong with tragedy. For Sammy, one fateful drive on a desert highway threatened to derail his life just as he began his ascent. After a grueling schedule of late-night shows and a recording session looming, Sammy hopped into his newly gifted Cadillac, an ostentatious present from his father and Uncle Will to celebrate his success. Exhausted from balancing performances, gambling, and endless social events, he drove along Route 66 at dawn. Suddenly, another driver backed into his lane. Sammy had no time to swerve. The screech of tires and the thunderous impact left twisted metal and shattered glass. When he came to, Sammy's first concern was for his assistant, Charlie, who lay injured and bleeding. But Charlie's horrified stare at Sammy's face said it all. Something was terribly wrong. Reaching up, Sammy felt his left eye dangling, the result of slamming into the Cadillac's bullet-shaped horn button. In the hospital, doctors had no choice but to remove the damaged eye. For a performer whose entire life was built on motion, expression, and presence, losing an eye felt like losing his identity. He worked furiously to relearn balance, re-choreograph his dances, and adapt to his new physical reality. The outpouring of support from Hollywood's elite stunned him. Everyone from Cary Grant to Frank Sinatra showed up at his hospital room or sent flowers. When Sammy finally returned to the stage, the applause was rapturous. This brush with mortality fueled Sammy's determination, but also cracked open the door to a darker undercurrent in his life. He would soon discover how fame, race, and romance could become a treacherous cocktail. Sammy Davis Jr. quickly learned that the entertainment business was equal parts art, commerce, and intimidation. By the mid-1950s, his career skyrocketed. He was performing at swanky nightclubs and lavish casinos, building a reputation as a one-of-a-kind showman. But he also longed to challenge the discriminatory norms that had dogged him since childhood. Part of that rebellion was in the form of a clandestine relationship with actress Kim Novak, a blonde Hollywood star whose public image was meticulously shaped by the powerful and notoriously controlling Harry Cohn, head of Columbia Pictures. She was rebellious, determined to live freely outside the constraints of her contract. Sammy felt equally defiant, unwilling to hide his attraction just because segregationists and old-school executives decreed he should know his place. When rumors spread, Novak's bosses were furious. They viewed Sammy, a black performer, as a threat to the carefully manicured image of their prized leading lady. Tensions mounted to the point that Sammy received a terrifying ultimatum from shady underworld figures linked to the studio. Mob enforcers allegedly kidnapped him for a few hours to ensure he knew they weren't bluffing. If he didn't break things off with Novak, or if he didn't marry a black woman immediately, he risked losing his remaining eye, or far worse. The very next step Sammy took to save his life would plunge him into a new nightmare. Fear can twist logic and drive people to desperate measures, and Sammy's desperate measure was a sham marriage. Desperate to appease the threats, Sammy scoured his contact list, searching for someone, anyone, he could marry in haste. He landed on Lorraine White, a dancer he barely knew. Against her own misgivings, White agreed, lured by promises of money and perhaps the allure of being Mrs. Sammy Davis Jr. for a short time. Their wedding day was more of a business transaction than a romantic celebration. Reporters snapped photos of the beautiful couple, congratulating them on their supposedly happy union. Beneath the smiles, Sammy trembled. The weight of a forced vow, the heartbreak of losing Kim Novak, the knowledge that mobsters had effectively orchestrated his private life, it was unbearable. At the wedding reception, under the suffocating pressure, Sammy allegedly consumed far too much alcohol. His despair boiled over, and in a frightening outburst he tried to choke his new bride. Lorraine managed to escape, but the night took an even darker turn when Sammy's assistant found him later with a revolver pressed to his own head. "Why won't they let me live my life?" he cried. Only the assistant's calm intervention prevented a catastrophe. Within half a year, the marriage dissolved, but the scars, both for Sammy and Lorraine, remained. Although that nightmare ended, Sammy's life raced forward. The next chapter would see him embraced by some of the biggest stars in entertainment history, even as trouble continued to stalk him from the shadows. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, recognized Sammy's talent early on. Along with Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, they formed an informal group Sinatra initially wanted to call the Clan. Sammy, as the only black member, immediately objected to such a name, pointing out its disturbing connotation. In a twist of fate, it was actress Lauren Bacall who joked about them looking like a pack of rats after a particularly late night, forever cementing the name the Rat Pack. Together, they dominated Las Vegas in the early 1960s. Their shows were legendary, part comedy, part music, part improvised theatrics. Fans flocked from around the country to witness these concerts dripping in glamour. Sammy's spot in this superstar ensemble solidified him as a cultural icon. No matter how segregated the rest of the city might be, on stage with Sinatra and Dean Martin, he was an equal, at least for a few glorious hours each night. Off stage, though, prejudice persisted. Casinos and hotels still refused to house black performers, forcing Sammy to find accommodations away from the main strip. Ironically, being in the Rat Pack thrust him closer to the political spotlight too. During John F. Kennedy's 1960 campaign, the Rat Pack performed at Democratic fundraisers. But the romance in Sammy's life kept stirring controversy, overshadowing even his stage triumphs. While the adoration of fans seemed limitless, the forces of scandal and prejudice circled, threatening both his public image and his private hopes for love and acceptance. In 1960, Sammy Davis Jr. announced his engagement to Swedish actress May Britt, a blonde bombshell who captured his heart. Although some fans embraced their union, the broader public reaction was swift and, at times, brutal. polls from that era showed a mere 4% of Americans approved of interracial marriage, making their relationship both a daring statement and a glaring target. As a key figure entertaining for John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign, Sammy's personal life soon collided with political worries. Hate mail poured in, labeling Sammy's involvement as a liability to Kennedy's chances. Panicked advisors urged the future president to steer clear of Sammy, fearing controversy would overshadow the campaign message. Even Frank Sinatra was cautioned to keep his distance until after Election Day. Despite the pressure, Sammy refused to give up on his future with May. Reluctantly, he agreed to postpone the wedding to protect his friends from potential fallout, a compromise that reportedly moved Sinatra to tears. Just days after Kennedy won the election, Sammy and May exchanged vows in a ceremony where Sinatra proudly served as best man. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though the fairy tale triumph of love over prejudice might endure, yet the obstacles persisted. Even after the wedding, some clubs and networks that once celebrated Sammy began to second-guess booking him, dreading how a racially charged public might react. At the same time, May found herself confronting a Hollywood system that had rarely seen such a high-profile interracial marriage. Though the newlyweds shared genuine affection and soon welcomed a daughter, Tracy, followed by the adoption of 2 more sons, Mark and Jeff, they couldn't escape the relentless scrutiny. On top of the external hostility, Sammy's hectic touring schedule took a serious toll on their domestic life. He was often away on stages from Vegas to New York, leaving May to shoulder the spotlight's harsh glare alone. The ideal of family unity clashed with the demands of stardom, pushing both husband and wife to the brink of exhaustion. By the mid-1960s, the cracks in their marriage were too large to ignore. Social backlash, financial pressures, and Sammy's ongoing fight for acceptance in both black and white communities weighed heavily on their home. In 1968, they divorced. It was yet another painful turning point in Sammy's life, underscoring that even vast talent and fame offered no true refuge from societal prejudice or personal heartache. Their breakup would mark the end of what began as a courageous stand for love and the beginning of a new chapter in Sammy Davis Jr.'s turbulent journey. By the time the 1970s rolled in, Sammy Davis Jr. was a megastar, but behind the scenes, fame had taken its toll. He grew addicted to a swirl of vices, alcohol, womanizing, and increasingly risque gatherings. According to those close to him, Sammy traveled with trunks full of explicit films, screening them at parties that escalated into near debauchery. People who had idolized him from the days of the Rat Pack found themselves shocked by the spectacle their friend had become. His personal assistant noted that the charming man who once spent elegant evenings with Sinatra and Dean Martin now surrounded himself with questionable companions, fueling a toxic cycle. Sammy's marriages fared no better. He wed Altavice Gore, believing that perhaps a black wife, this time chosen out of genuine affection, would help heal the disconnect he felt from parts of the black community. Yet the relationship was fraught with arguments over Sammy's unrelenting appetite for adult entertainment, late-night carousing, and controlling behavior. As the joy drained from his personal life, Sammy's body was also beginning to fail him. But even in the face of serious illness, he'd refused to let go of the one thing he loved most, his voice. In the late 1980s, Sammy was diagnosed with throat cancer, a cruel twist for a performer whose life revolved around singing. Doctors advised surgery that could save his life, but might rob him of his vocal cords. For Sammy, that was unthinkable. He'd rather face the end on his own terms than lose the instrument that defined him. His health declined rapidly. Ironically, in his final months, his weakened voice sounded clearer than it had in years. But behind the scenes, he was in constant pain. Astonishingly, trouble followed him right up to his deathbed. His employees reportedly pilfered his home, stealing art, jewelry, and even the precious memorabilia he'd collected over decades. Unpaid tax bills soared into the millions, threatening to leave his wife, Altaviz, destitute. Shortly before he passed, Sammy called his adopted son Mark with a startling revelation. Mark was his biological son. The mother, it turned out, was not May Britt. The identity of Mark's biological mother remains an unsolved mystery, a final glimpse into the hidden complexities of Sammy's personal life. On May 16, 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. drew his last breath. Less than 24 hours later, IRS officials descended on his mansion, seizing what little remained of his valuables. Destitute and grieving, Altaviz was left to shoulder Sammy's tax burden, forcing her to liquidate almost everything they owned. She died years later under dire circumstances, a tragic epilogue to a marriage once brimming with hope and love. Sammy's physical life ended, but his legend still radiates through every classic recording, every tribute show, and every conversation about entertainment history. To truly appreciate his greatness, though, we have to acknowledge the full scope of his journey, the dazzling achievements, and the painful truths. Sammy Davis Jr.'s life was a study in contrasts, a child prodigy who enchanted audiences from the vaudeville stage, a man who braved the horrors of racial violence in the army, and a star who danced alongside Hollywood's elite, yet was often denied the basic respect they took for granted. He soared to unimaginable fame, joining forces with Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin in the iconic Rat Pack. Crowds roared in delight as he tap-danced across stages, belted out show-stopping tunes, and delivered comedic one-liners with effortless flair. But behind that razzle-dazzle lurked extraordinary pain. Forced into a fake marriage by mob threats, haunted by bigotry, and driven to near madness by the need to belong, Sammy exemplified the paradox of stardom, revered by millions yet at times crushed by loneliness. Even at the end, fighting cancer and facing crippling debt, he clung to his voice rather than sacrifice what had given him purpose from childhood. We remember Sammy Davis Jr. not just as a singer, dancer, actor, or Rat Pack member, but as a testament to human resilience. His story resonates with anyone who has fought to be recognized, to break barriers, and to remain authentic in a world full of constraints. He reminds us that even the brightest stars can harbor profound darkness, and that sometimes the most captivating performances arise from the deepest struggles. If this saga of triumph and turmoil captivates you, stay tuned for more revealing journeys through old Hollywood legends. Like and subscribe for the next chapter in entertainment history. And remember that behind every sparkling spotlight, there's a very human story waiting to be told.
The dream that I see makes me what I am.